Good morning, everyone. This is the February 7th meeting of the Dunn County Planning Resource and Development Committee. Looks like all the committee members are here, so we have a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order. Um, Approval of the minutes from our January 17th meeting. Motion from Suarez Morehouse. Is there a second? Burke seconds. Any questions, corrections, additions? All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Minutes are approved. We do have, we'll have an opportunity for public comment in the hearing, but we do have at least one request for public comment during the public comment session. So I don't know, it's Julie Bendel? Julie here? There you are, okay. Yeah, could you go up there, please? Just name and address, Julie.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Julie Bendel. I live at 1515 Main Street, East in Menominee. I'm speaking on behalf of Health Done Rights Housing Action Team in regards to item 6A, accessory dwelling units. The housing study completed last year underscored the lack of available housing for rent or for sale in our community. And as a housing action team, we are supportive of accessory dwelling units and your efforts to create more homes via this option. And as part of the group that initiated the housing study, I just have to say how pleased and delighted I am that it's proving to be a useful tool and resource. So thank you very much for your commitment to housing in our community.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who's not signed up for this part of the meeting? So I think we'll just also, in the spirit with which we've done our meetings lately, if it's okay without objection from the committee, if it makes sense later on during our discussions to ask for some comments from the community, I'll do that. Okay. So we have a public hearing, and I'll go ahead and call the public hearing to order. Again, all of the committee members are present. What we'll do is the process will be, we'll have a report from staff outlining the request for the rezone. And then we'll have an opportunity for the committee to ask questions, and then an opportunity for the petitioner, if they wish to provide any input, and then an opportunity for anyone from the public who has an interest in providing input to do that. If people are testifying, we'd ask you to come up to the microphone. I will ask you to swear in because this is a public hearing. And I guess that's about it. We'll just make it work. Thanks. Okay, Ann, you want to provide us with the presentation?
All right, good morning. I'm Ann Wodarczyk, Planner Zoning Administrator for Dunn County. I am presenting a staff report for the rezone request that we're looking at today. In your meeting packets, you should have had a more thorough review of, more of a technical review from staff, but we're just going to cover that in this report as a summary. So forgive me if I don't pronounce this correctly, but I believe our property owner applicant is Groots Real Estate LLC. The agent is Jeremy Scott from Real Land Surveying, and the site address is E5690 County Road D in the town of Tainter. The parcel ID and other information is listed here on the screen. I will not bore you with reading those out loud. The current zoning is residential 1 for the property. It's just under an acre at 0.70 total acres. And the requested zoning is shoreland recreational. A technical review report was included in the supporting meeting documents, and this was an analysis of the 12 rezone review criteria for the subject property. So this will just highlight some key findings and recommendations and an analysis from staff. Some background, Groots Real Estate LLC has applied to rezone approximately 0.07 acres of land in the town of Tainter from residential 1 to shoreline recreational. The Town of Tainter Planning Commission met last night. I'm hoping that either our agent or applicant can fill us in on how that went. And the town board will be meeting on February 8th. So the applicant owns 5 adjacent parcels. You can see these are outlined in red on the screen. This is where Jake's Supper Club is located, and that is shaded in purple, just the building and some of the decking. So we have 5 adjacent parcels, and the subject property is the one that is shaded in blue, and you can see that it's zoned R1, while the remaining parcels are all zoned as shoreline recreational. So they're looking to combine these properties, and under the current zoning rules, you cannot combine properties of different zoning designations. Their ultimate goal is to repair and reconstruct the existing outdoor deck and seating area, and then possibly expand some of the principal structure. Currently, that structure goes across 4 of the parcels, and that just a little bit of that corner is in the subject parcel, as you can see on the map here. This is just another aerial photo, just kind of showing some of the key features of the property. There is, you can see number 7, there is a paved parking lot there. 2, there is an old accessory structure. I believe it at one time was a cabin, but now is used for storage for the business. 6 is a gravel parking area. 3 is Lake Tainter / the Red Cedar. Looking at number 4, that is going to be County Road D, and 5 is County Road G. And I just wanted to include another Google Earth image because this will show more of the vehicles and where those parking areas are. And this is scaled out so you can kind of see the general area that Jake's Supper Club is located. So one of the key review criteria is looking at the comprehensive plans for the town. So this map here is the existing land use map for the town of Tainter. It's showing the subject area. You can see this is in the orange circle as red, which designates it as commercial. So the existing use identified by the town of Tainter is commercial. And then we're going to look at the future land use map. So this map represents what the town would like to see in the future for development. In the orange circle again, we have rural residential. So one of the things, I should go back. One of the things that should be noted is that the shoreline recreational area allows for both residential development and commercial. This area was basically designed to accommodate businesses like Jake's that have kind of these mixed uses. There's not a lot of shoreline recreational areas in Dunn County. Most of them are along this area. You know, they're always along a body of water, but they do allow for kind of, you know, an A or B approach of residential development or commercial, or even in this case, both. So this does follow that future intent. I mean, it doesn't call it out as commercial. However, it does say that it's residential. And by rezoning this to shoreline recreational, you would not be taking that plan away. We would not be going against their plan necessarily. Again, I'd really like to hear what they said during their town meeting and see if they agree with that. So some conclusions. I just wanted to wrap up that we're in the staff report. Compatibility, we examined the 12 rezone criteria, and we found that they would fit the surrounding mixed use nature of the area. We could go back to the map, but you could see that there's a lot of shoreline recreational mapped out there. There's a lot of R1. The current zoning mix of the property and the adjacent parcels poses a challenge for the property owner. The rezoning would allow for a sensible solution, essentially cleaning that up, putting it all on one parcel. We wouldn't have to worry about strange setback requirements. It would just allow the property owner to have one single parcel for Jake's Supper Club. Historical considerations, considering the role of Jake's in the community's history, the rezone would preserve Jake's Supper Club as a local landmark. Permit history, so staff looked through the history of permits for Jake's Supper Club. They went back for 4 decades. Basically, we kind of just saw that the property has adapted over the years to meet changing regulations, and they've continued to work with our staff to make sure they're getting the proper permits. With all of this information, staff recommends approving the rezone. However, I would like to note that we haven't heard from the town, so I can't confirm whether this does fit their plan or not, but that would be the one outlier. So committee's action today, you have a few things you can do. Recommend approval of the zoning amendment, disapproval of the zoning amendment, or postpone the recommendation for additional information. And that concludes my report, and I'm here for questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, so it says that there's a possibility that there could be a bigger footprint. So what do they plan on doing to address the storm water? Anything different from before?
So I did analyze that as part of the criteria. So that is one of the criteria points that we have to look at. So I'm glad you brought that up. So they are looking to do a stormwater mitigation plan. Because this is in shoreland, they are subject to shoreland zoning, and they will have to make sure that they're meeting the impervious surface restrictions, and the stormwater mitigation plan will be part of that.
And just one more question?
Sure.
I mean, on this one map, you got transition zone. I never seen that before. Is that just something that they, I think, right, yeah, right there, that map there. I've never heard of it before. It's not part of the official county zoning. It must be just town of Tanner, what they use at their, I think so, for planning.
Yeah. And I can say too that I can see one area that they have, 2 areas, I think, just glancing at this for transition area. I really can't speak to that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Supervisor Kinnear, please.
A question only. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering why it came to us before we got a response from the board. Is there some time frame that's important?
So this was something that was brought up to the applicant. We do not require that they have a town opinion for a rezone. We can't force them to have that before they come here. So it was presented to them as an option, and it was definitely said, hey, look, we're going to look at the town's opinion as part of this, or not we, but the board or the committee would likely look at the town's opinion, which tends to weigh pretty heavily on that decision. Knowing their timeline for the construction project, they wanted to get this in as soon as possible. I do believe that their agent is here and might be able to answer some of that reasoning as well, but that's, I mean, I think I would prefer to have all of those things in a row before I make a report, but due to the time constraints, we went this direction.
I'm curious, is there another option for us? Can we, I think this is a good thing, but can we say, let's approve it pending approval of the town board? If the town board approves it, it automatically goes ahead.
Yep.
I hate to go without anything there, but it's been our past practice to always have the town board before we approved it. So could we just say pending?
Yep, that is, so you could essentially make your decision, you know, you recommend approval based on, I don't know how you would say it now.
Contingent upon.
Contingent upon the approval of the town board. Because we do have the planning commission's recommendations, which I don't know yet, but the town board will be tomorrow. So I think that's an option.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Would the agent for the applicant, Karen? Again, I'll have to swear you in. Just raise your right hand if you could, please. Do you swear your testimony will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And name and address.
Jeremy Scow, Real Land Surveying, 1871, 186th Street in Chippewa Falls. Yeah, Ann did a good job presenting everything this morning. Last night I was in attendance of the town meeting. There was no objection to it. It passed unanimously. I guess it was recommended to the town board unanimously for tomorrow night's meeting for a recommendation for approval of the rezone.
Okay. Does the committee have any questions, or do you have any other comments you want to make?
Nope, she did a good job explaining things. And yeah, like with the time constraint thing, yeah, instead of just when, I guess, when we were presented to submit for the rezone, it was, and since, like you'd mentioned earlier, it's a pretty low ask for the rezone, but otherwise, if, just with the timing of things, it'd set us off back a whole nother month if we wanted to wait for the town board's recommendation to come back to this body. We'd have to wait another month, but we decided to go this route.
Okay.
Chairman?
Yeah.
Would you, since the question has already been raised, would you address the stormwater mitigation plan?
Sure,
please?
we're working with some civil engineers out of Eau Claire that will be working, like Ann mentioned, doing some stormwater mitigation and having the right facilities. And I'm not an engineer by any means, but they'll have the right facilities and right implementations put in place to control stormwater concerns on site.
Anything else from anyone? Okay, thank you very
Thank
much. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to offer testimony in the hearing?
I own Jake's. Do you want to ask any questions?
If you'd like to testify.
I have any questions, I can go if you want.
I don't think we have any questions, so thanks for being here. Okay, any other things from the committee? So with that then, that's the presentation and the testimony for the public record of the hearing. And I'll close the hearing. Without objection, would be okay with the committee if we proceed to 9B, which is consideration of the rezone? I don't see any objections, so let's move to that. Could I have, first of all, could I have a motion to approve?
I would make a motion to approve the rezone contingent upon the approval from the Tanner Town Board.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion of the motion? Okay, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries and the request is approved. Thanks a lot for coming, you guys. Appreciate it. Planning and zoning, review and discuss 6A, planning, discuss proposed text amendment to accessory dwelling units. Back to you, Ann.
Today's my day.
Yeah.
So I did hand out some packets to the committee members that please ignore everything except for the standards. This is just me. All of the other information in there is just me thinking things through. And I simply ran out of time when prepping for this meeting. So if you begin at the 13.3.17.01 purpose and intent, and I'm trying to see if I can see a page number there. Is it page 8 possibly? Should be where I opened it when I handed it to you.
Do you have another one?
Oh, Tommy.
I don't have a page number on
I
mine.
know, but I.
Oh,
Again.
you want to come and number mine for me? Yeah.
That's my fault.
Okay.
So I'll share my screen here too. I just wanted to have a tool for you to see things in writing, and sometimes it's a little easier with the screen sharing. So get a little bigger. All right. So some changes based on the last conversation. we went in and changed some of the standards. I added location and design standards for you to look at. Decide if that's something you want to see or not. Those things were talked about the last time. Yeah, just gonna make them a little bit bigger here.
So up until then, is everything the same?
So everything's the same. I accept design standards,
Okay.
location, and then at some point, I'd like to maybe look at some of the definitions that we might want to tweak. So the design standards, this is standard H, ADU must match the exterior architectural style, appearance, and character of the primary dwelling with similar materials, facade, and roof design, or complement the primary dwelling through the use of materials and design of equal or better quality. This is directly pulled from some very commonly used design standards and other ADU ordinances. I think the intent here is so that these ADUs fit in visually with the neighborhood. And I know that was brought up as a concern at the last meeting. Yeah. Okay, so if you started where I kind of said with that purpose and intent, and then just we'll go all the way down, just keep going. You go through the definitions, permits, and then in standards, it is letter H. And we can talk about that one, or I can also just talk about the location. This was something we were kind of talking about too, with making them fit into the neighborhood, especially in the R1 zoning districts. So some suggestions here are on the same lot as the primary dwelling, or located in the rear or side yard of the primary structure. Maybe these are things you want to consider. Again, I'll just ask, I'm going to leave this to you guys to talk about and discuss, but if you want my opinion, please just ask for it. I'm not going to try to butt in. So that's all I ask in this discussion. And I can close my mouth and let you discuss.
A question, Tom?
Yeah.
Thank you. On I, I thought that they would be on the same lot, isn't that?
Yes, this is just being very specific about
Oh,
that.
Okay, okay.
It might not need to be in there, but I think we're making sure that it is. I mean, I don't think it hurts to have things super clear, but we could remove it just from redundancy's sake.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
And so you invited us to ask you about your opinion. What are your opinions about H and I?
So as far as design standards, I think they can be tricky, because I can kind of foresee people coming to us and saying, well, what, I would end up being a judge of the aesthetic features of a home. That would kind of put our staff in an interesting situation. I think if we were to do something like this, we would want to be more specific or not specific at all. I mean, I feel like there's two different ways to approach this. I know when I worked for St. Croix County, we had color restrictions for homes built in the Riverway.
Color, you said?
Color restrictions, yep. So they were supposed to be natural colors, but one could argue that every single color in the rainbow could be found in nature somewhere. So we had made a chart that had the color scheme. But, it was just very complicated. I mean, you come across people want to build white houses. White was not a color option. Or black. And black is actually a color that blends in very well, but it wasn't an option. So it gets tricky. I'd like to, think that it's kind of more up to the property owner as far as what they want their home to look like. But, that's just my thought on it.
Chairman?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't have any particular objection, but it does seem to me that the more criteria and the more specific the criteria that we add, we're nitpicking and inhibiting the ability of the property owner to build the ADU, which is designed to meet a need, and they want it to meet a need, and we're telling them that they can't, whatever, paint it black. Which, yes, I know it is, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and doing some research on people who build, ADUs, the people who offer to do them, they have these nice little like prefabricated plans, right, that you can buy. And, to me, what I've been seeing, they look nice, right? They look like they would fit in with, my neighborhood, which is single family residential. They're nice, but they are also, yeah, perfect. Thank you. But they also, you could argue, right, don't have the same cookie cutter layout as what my home does. And that does seem like a problem to me.
Is this sometimes designed to limit trailer houses or things like that? Is that one of the purposes that something like this might have been put in other places?
It could have been. To me, this seems like more of a covenant for like a
Yes, yeah.
subdivision rather than the zoning restriction. So there are some ADU ordinances that I've seen that specifically just call out trailer homes and mobile homes and say not allowed. And there are some that actually intentionally made it possible for them. So it does go either way. I guess when I think about this a lot, I think, what would we allow for a normal home? And that should be maybe applied for these ADUs, other than maybe just some size and location restrictions. So I think having them similar to homes makes it easier to regulate. But there are some that do call out mobile homes explicitly. And I could find that language if that's something you're interested in.
I'm not at all. I don't know if we need this. I mean, it's a good thing to talk about and so forth because it should fit in, but as long as we're talking about this right now, does this ordinance prohibit recreational vehicles? I mean, could someone come in and bring in a recreational vehicle or a modified one like they've already done in some places around Lake Tanner?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we do have some regulations specifically for recreational vehicles. I think, I don't know if an RV could get these UDC approvals that are required. I'd have to look into that, but it seems like it wouldn't be something they'd be able to do. So we do have that standard E for compliance with building codes. So I would think that might eliminate that issue, but that's a good thought. Maybe
Don't
that's
we
something you want to
prohibit
consider.
recreational vehicles as permanent dwellings?
No,
We don't.
recreational vehicles can only, there's certain restrictions as far as, I think, no more than 180 days of,
Correct, that's what I mean.
Oh, maybe I just didn't hear you.
Well, I
right.
mean, we're talking about a permanent dwelling, right?
Yeah, we do not allow RVs as a
So an
permanent dwelling right
RV could
now.
not be used as an ADU if the ADU is going to be there more than 180 days.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know about anybody else, but there are 4 large RVs parked in my neighborhood, and they could for a lot longer than 180 days. Nobody's living in them, but they're
Right.
still there.
Yeah, that will happen. Any other questions, Mike? Gary.
Gary, you go ahead, please.
Just a couple thoughts and comments on that standards on B. I always thought that the ADUs are supposed to be subordinate, but here it can be up to 99%. And I would think that'd be pretty hard to tell from a distance, like which is the main one and which is the ADU.
Right. So there's a couple options here. So originally we had this written as a size subordinate, which we did not define what that meant.
Okay.
So to clear that up, essentially to me, subordinate is just smaller. So that could be up to 99%, as long as it wasn't the exact same size. You know, if this is something, you know, the committee could apply a different percentage here to kind of reduce that and make the little, what, you know, subordinate means a little more clear.
Okay.
That's an option.
And I know that when we had our comprehensive, like rezone back 2016, that each township made their own map, you know, and GA and R1 at the time was like a single family. And now it's going to be a major change. Am I wrong in thinking that anytime there's a major change, that's one option for the township that says, hey, we can get out right now because this is a major change? Because there's only certain times they can get out, if I remember right, and this would be a major change.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to answer all of them. Don't feel free to remind me if I don't get to all of it. So as far as the R1, I mean, I don't think that you've made a concrete decision on whether ADUs are allowed in R1 and how they're allowed. So that's still on the table. As far as changes in the zoning ordinance that will allow for towns to enter or exit county zoning, it needs to be a complete rewrite. So this is not, that would not qualify for that. But just as a heads up, there is legislation, which I would like to bring this to the committee as just an informational point next meeting. I believe it's AB 881, proposing to allow a little more flexibility for towns to come in and out of county zoning. Now they're proposing every 5 years they have the option to. There's a lot more detail that I could get into, but right now, as it's written, it's pretty difficult for them to leave unless there's a comprehensive rewrite, and it needs to be called a comprehensive rewrite. So obviously, we don't want to force anyone to stay into county zoning if they're really opposed to a change. So I think we can work with them too. The towns can also have their own ordinance that says, you know, maybe they have an ADU ordinance and it specifically says they're not allowed in certain places. They can be more restrictive than county zoning, but that'd be something that they would have to do on the town level.
And just one more comment, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
sure.
I think that there are certain, you know, situations where it would be appropriate in R1 and GA, but why not just put those two on special exceptions? That way there's a little more, the town board has more to say about it, but they still have the option of either the special exception or a rezone. So it's not that they don't have the options, you know, but there's, you know, sometimes old ideas die hard, you know, when you're, say, a single family.
Yep.
They do that, but, you know, so we still have the standards and they can still go to the Board of Adjustment and get it approved, because doesn't the board approve more than it disapproves?
Yeah, so if this did go as a special exception, the board could apply additional standards, you know, whatever, you know, site
Mhm.
specific. So that's something they could do. They would still have to follow all the ones that we have in the ordinance normally.
Right.
But yep,
And
Right.
there still be some interaction with the town board too, because they could put a letter there, and I would think that letter would carry a lot of weight,
right.
you know, so.
Yeah,
okay.
so we would still, you know, ask for the opinion of the town before it went to the board, similar to what we do here with rezones.
I
Yep.
think you answered all my questions. Thank you.
Mike or Monica.
I wanted to ask about C. So this was the one about that the placement must not exceed 300 linear feet. So my question is, like, suppose there's something unique about the topography of that lot, right? That would prohibit, you know, make it difficult for them to meet that standard. Would there be some kind of exception process, case by case?
So if we were to put this as a standard, a variance would be required. Variances have to meet the 3 criteria, you know, hardship, things like that. Having property that doesn't allow you to meet this would be something they would look at in as far as granting that variance.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Attached ADUs are kind of, I don't know what the French fait, it's accomplished, basically. People do it now. I don't have any problem with attached ADUs in any of the zones because we can't really control it. If you make a rule that you can't enforce, that the rule is worse than useless. So I don't have any problem with attached ADUs in any of them. And you changed the, was it 600 feet to, oh, no, 300 is still the same? Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's still the same. So the only questions I have are the standards for detached. And the concerns I have really haven't been addressed yet. I don't know if any of you have actually gone and looked at, especially around Lake Tainer, but in many areas, you have a third of an acre, a half an acre, 3/4 of an acre. And those are in R1 and they're grandfathered. So to put another house, to put a house, 1,500 square feet is a house on there. And if you can fit the septic in there, it's going to go. So we need to address that. And I've suggested using the same criteria we've been using for years and years, and that's a 1 acre minimum to have a detached ADU in there. All of our new lots, I wouldn't say new because it's before our time. So it's too small. So it didn't adjust that, and I'd like that to be addressed. In the same space, especially around the lake with the smaller lots, you start having the impermeable surface problem, which we just talked about at Jake's here and so forth. So that's a concern. The smaller lots around the lake is my concern, and then the size. So those are the three concerns that really I think we could address and come to an agreement. The 1,500 square feet is a house. It's a house. If you talk to a developer, it's a house. If you go and talk to anybody in the township, in the county, and say, what's a mother-in-law house? What's a casita? What's this? They're going to say it's a house or a dwelling for 1 or 2 people. And that's what I think it should be. So for 1 or 2 people, 1,500 square feet, Monica referred to some small homes. One of my constituents gave me this to look at, over 360 homes under 1,200 square feet. Well, I looked through there and there's like under 800 square feet, you have 2 and 3 bedroom homes, and they're nice. You have two bedrooms and a bath and a living room and a kitchen. So I don't know if any of you have actually gone and looked at some plans and seen the sizes, but you don't need 1,500 square feet, and it makes it really difficult. In my mind, and the people I've talked to, it's not a home. It's not a starter home. Talking to somebody this morning, it might be a home for the parents moving in, and I can see that. So I'd like somehow address the really small lots. And there are hundreds of lots under a half an acre, or under an acre. Maybe, I don't remember how many were around the lake when we did this, Heather. How many signatures did they have to get, or how many different properties were around the lake? 1,000? No?
I want to say 642, but
Okay.
that sounds weirdly specific and
Yes,
probably not
it
entirely
does.
accurate. But 600 to 6 to
Okay,
700.
okay. So that's just around the lake. So can we come up with something that would take care of these small lots? And what I say is a house rather than an ADU.
Does the separation, the 300 foot separation address that, do you think?
So I think the 300 essentially kind of keeps them close. So, and that's, when we put that in, the consideration was that you might have like a 40-acre parcel and one house is in one corner and the other's in the other corner. And it's not so much of an accessory dwelling at that point as just another dwelling on the property. And the intent with that too was to kind of keep these so that the intent of an ADU is so that they're more affordable. you can use existing infrastructure and things like that. It's not a way to like skirt around the zoning ordinance and just build another house on your property, but it's intended to just be, you know, helping people age in place, stay living in the same area, use the same driveway, use the same electrical, you know, maybe you can tap into your septic system, maybe you have to make an expansion to it. But that a lot of the intent behind ADU, I feel like, is that. As far as some of these other restrictions, you know, they will have to have room for a septic. They'll have to have the right size septic, just like a regular home. I think at one time we did discuss having a 1 acre minimum or some kind of minimum, or a minimum that meets the minimum of the underlying zoning. But again, in Dunn County, it's 1 acre, you know, we can just make it whatever you think. Trying to think if there's anything else I could cover there. I just wanted to make one comment that 1,500 square feet, I think staff had calculated the size of like the average mobile home to come up with that number. Again, it's up to you, you know, however you want to go, but I'm here if you have any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Dan, sorry.
Oh, thank you,
I
Mr.
was-
Chairman. I would argue, with the exception of the size restriction, with which I do not agree, that your concerns are addressed by the standards in this document by staff's planning, particularly the any kind of stormwater or septic issues, I think, are addressed. I also, I mean, just as a matter of practicality, there aren't going to be 600 ADUs built around the lake. I mean, I think it's not going to happen. And so I am comfortable with the design standards and the standards that are incorporated in this document and the text amendment that we've already looked at.
I'd like people to picture Woodland Terrace as one. That's one that's got some water problems, and they're all over an acre, so anybody could put one in there. And it might be done, because there's a lot of people that could do that. But the most likely place for the ADUs for non-quote ADU use would be around the lake. But so, I'm not comfortable. So we're in different situations. We both want it. And I had another suggestion that I brought up, and I don't know, I had asked Ann about it, is adding another zoning zone. Like make it R1A. If someone wants to do an ADU in R1, they go to the town board and say, I want to do an ADU here. And the town board looks at it and says, yeah, fine, we'll rezone to R1A. And in that case, the town could have some criteria. The town of Tanner might have different criteria than the town of Menominee, but it's a simple rezone. It doesn't go through the Board of Adjustment, which Diane, I think both of us have little qualms about going through the BOA. It might be, it gives the towns control, because they're all different. Town of Grant is sure different than the town of Tanner or town of Menominee. I think town of Menominee and town of Tanner and maybe Red Cedar are unique. And Tanner and town of Menominee are really populous. I would hate to see, but that's a suggestion. To have another zoning, and then that way you can have it in R1, no problem.
Unknown caller.
Thought that was me. But so it'd be cut and dried. Boom, you can do it. You can't. The town would have, say, you got to have a half acre, you got to have an acre, you got to have whatever it is the town would decide, and they'd have to have criteria, because it's a legislative type decision that they've got to come up with good reasons for. So that's a suggestion to bridge the gap there.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure. Sure.
if these homes, these ADUs, I think we all can agree in time they're going to be sold. You know, like maybe not the first 10, 20 years, but maybe sometime. So how's that going to work if they share like water, sewer, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. Do they have to be like a condominium? What kind of zoning would they have to be separated if they're only, you know, 20 feet apart?
So in the standards that we have proposed right now that you guys have, we have a requirement for a deed restriction. So prior to us issuing the permit for the ADU, the property owner would need to create a deed restriction that actually prohibits the sale of the ADU unless it's legally subdivided. So essentially, they would have to go through the CSM process to put that ADU on a separate property. And then we, you know, at that point, they would have to have an agreement for a septic easement or utility easements. That would be on the property owner. We wouldn't have a whole lot of say in that. And then the other part of the deed restriction is to prohibit the conversion of the property to a condominium. So they wouldn't be able to have that option either, as this is written right now. And then we also have letter F, the separate sale of the ADU cannot occur unless that's legally subdivided. So we kind of got it in there pretty covered right now. But again, I mean, I think that would address that concern.
Just to follow that up, on that deed restriction, because the county has a 1 acre minimum, right? Would you have to say that on that deed restriction that ADU would have to at least have enough room in that zone or that lot to be like a full 1 acre?
Yep, so that would come into play when they're creating that CSM, because we would review it to make sure it meets that 1 acre minimum
Okay.
lot size.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Like, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you said your major concern was the area around the lake and why you think that is of concern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that is one of my major concerns. Area around the lake, if you look at it, there's so many lots that are substandard. And I remember going through things here when people come in and say, I'd like to do this or this with my property, and it wasn't big enough. And we said, and Tom or whoever it was, Michelle, went out and looked and said, okay, we can fit a septic in here. So we made the exceptions. So I'm thinking that some of these lots, there's technically going to be enough place to expand or add a system. And we've learned that when you have concentrated people on small lots, that it's going to damage the groundwater. So that's part of it. Right now, part of the problem with the lake is septic systems and people mowing and having impermeable surfaces. This would only increase that around the lake. We just got a lake district started and approving basically 2 houses on 1 lot is counterintuitive to that. It's counterproductive. So that would be around the lake, but also other areas, especially the town of Menominee that surrounds on 3 sides the city. We have basically city-like lots and city-like buildings. And to just say, okay, it's R1, you have the right to build another house on your property because 1,500 square feet is a house. I don't know if other people have done and looked at other houses or looked at a book like that, but look at some of these plans. 1,500 square feet is a house. And we perhaps are, okay, I'll just stick to your question, Tom. So those are my
that's okay.
concerns. Those are my concerns around the lake, especially town of Menominee, the concerns with R1. We have a lot of R1. And it takes away decision-making in general from the townships again. And we're saying we have a housing problem. Here's our solution and it's up to, here it is. I don't want the townships to have to go back and pass ordinances or do whatever it is to try and make up for what we're doing here. If we do it right and consider all of them, I think we can come up with a good ordinance. And like I said, there's only with the detached ADU is the only questions we have, and only in R1 for me and perhaps in general ag there. It seems like there's we just came up with 1,500 square feet, like you said. Why can't we address it a little bit and make an adjustment based on facts rather than, so those are some of my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the principal issue for us is, I mean, we commissioned a housing study. It's pretty comprehensive. And it basically suggests to us as decision makers for the county that we're dealing with a 5-alarm fire. We have a housing crisis. I'm not suggesting in any way that ADUs are going to solve the housing crisis, because they're not. And we all acknowledge that. It is, in the experience of other municipalities, other counties, other states, other locales, it is an effective way to begin to address a pretty significant crisis, particularly, as the housing study points out, for older people who are looking for a place that is easier to maintain, smaller on a single level. ADUs can help to address that problem. And the more we restrict it, the more we say that Dunn County is not open for housing, which I think, as we learned in a zoning task force group, that there is a perception that Dunn County is not open for housing, that unduly regulates housing. So, I mean, I think we're making this a giant thing when it isn't a giant thing, and it is an important step that this county needs to take to address what I think is a pretty significant problem. And maybe you can read the housing study and say it's not a problem. I don't read it that way, and I don't think most people do. And that also is not to say that I'm not open to some tweaking, but I think the more difficulties, the more restrictions we add, the less likely it is that ADUs will help us address what is a crisis.
Well, perhaps a way to move along and is, the housing crisis is a big thing. I don't disagree that what your first part of what you talked about with the housing, totally agree with. Perhaps if we looked at it, just pretend for a moment, there was no housing crisis and people have been coming to you with ADUs. And without the housing crisis, people have been coming to them with ADUs. And I think you said last time, every single time it's either 1 or 2 people that they want to put in a place, or like 1 or 2. Okay, so if we were to looking without a housing crisis, if we imagine that, if we're looking just to service the needs of the people in our county, we would look at that. Okay, 1 or 2 people. So you have a dwelling for 1 or 2 people to address that need. The other part, now what was the other part I was thinking of? Oh yeah, we had Michelle sitting when we were in the other room. Michelle came and she talked to us, and she had real misgivings about ADUs, especially around the lake. And she is the expert. So if there was no housing problem, and we looked at it, it seems to me that, well, we've got some problems that might occur, so let's make it so that we can have a small dwelling so that the parents can live there. That'd be 2-person. And like I said, these are really nice houses here for under 800 square feet. They're very nice, 2-bedroom. And there's even a 3-bedroom one here for 784 square feet. So if there was no housing crisis, I don't think we would have a problem right here as far as maybe limiting the size. And 1,500 square feet is really really big. So think about that, and if you start off from there and then say, okay, we do have a housing crisis. What can we do to go from serving the needs of what's been asked of us to apply what's been asked of us to the housing crisis? It's just a different way of looking at it. I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with something because we're so close.
So I tend to agree with Mike about the 1,500 square feet. I look at housing design books too, and I think that, well, ADUs of a smaller size would serve the function of relieving the housing crisis. I think it would allow people to move out of their homes or to provide additional housing for family members. And 1,500 is a pretty big size. Is there any, Mike, do you have a suggestion on that? That is 1,000 the right number, or you need more?
Well, I'm sure 1,000 would be too small for some. I just picked 2-bedroom houses and I looked and they were under 800 square feet. But there are 2 and 3-bedroom houses that are very nice under 1,000 square feet also. So 1,000 is still kind of big for me, but at least let's lower it a little bit and look at it. Yeah, it'd be, yeah, 800 or 1,000. I prefer 800, but
What 1,000 doesn't do, I mean, there are situations, I'm sure, and I know people have talked to us about this, where somebody lives in a small house now and wants to build an ADU, or wants to build a house on their property that they would then become their main house, and the ADU would become their main house, their permanent house would become an ADU. And 1,000 square feet might be a problem for that kind of situation. But whether they're going to be in R1 is unlikely. Or it's not even certain. So it may or may not be a problem. So that would only be a problem if it were if it were not enough if it were difficult to separate that house as a lot at some point in time, I would imagine. Anyway, so if we said, I mean, do you have any problem with going down to 1,000? Do you see any?
I think the point that you brought up made a lot of sense. You know, if somebody was going to try to kind of essentially convert their existing home into the ADU and then build another house, that might be a problem. The other thought is that we would not, essentially mobile homes wouldn't be included anymore. So the old general agriculture, having a mobile home on the property is gone. We're still seeing that. There's still people out there that still have them. That's the only thing I can see right now. I will say too, I mean, these ADUs have to follow the same setbacks as a normal house. So there's a 25-foot rear yard setback. Side yards typically are 10 to 5, wherever, depending on where you're at. In the shoreline zoning area, you have that 75-foot setback from the water, other things like that. I mean, it's still, there's a lot of restrictions here that I think are going to prevent most of these ADUs from happening. But we can always, you know, try our best to put in what we think is going to work, and these can be looked at again. If we're finding they're not working, we can do another revision. But that's the only issue I can think of is the mobile homes. And your point.
of course, you could just make the 1,000 for R1. So that's really,
true. Yeah.
really my only concern. You can make all kinds of, you know, each one could be separate if you wanted to.
Right.
So,
You had mentioned like maybe that additional zoning district, you know, we could do that, or we could do just in R, I mean, that'll get complicated, I think, but R1 could specifically have different restrictions than these other standards. I mean, if that's something that is an option, that they're just not allowed to be as big in R1.
I personally, I'd be happy with 1,000 feet. The line that we've been, or along the lines of what we've been talking about. Yeah, I mean, I've voiced concern about 500 square feet being too small, right? We're not talking about 500 square feet. 1,000, I'm happy with, if that's what we need to get consensus here. That works for me. Tom, I see that there are hands behind us. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we have tried to get narrowed down what our the concerns are here. Mike, do you have, so that would be one way of dealing with the size concern would be to have an R1, a smaller R1's square foot limit. Are there other things that would deal with your concerns, Mike?
1 acre minimum, just like we have now. Just apply any time you're going to put in, I'm talking R1. It probably should be R2 because there are smaller lots, but in R1, it should be 1 acre minimum before you can add another home.
The lot,
The lot, you know, if I've got a lot
the
that's.
original lot.
The original lot, yeah.
And why do you say that?
Well, I guess you could answer that. I could answer the shortest way is why do we have a 1 acre minimum now? And there are a bunch of reasons why we have 1 acre minimum now. But all those reasons, why would we change now to say we don't need 1 acre minimum anymore? Because that's what it would be. So you asked me about my concerns, and if we lowered the size, that would really help, and the minimum lot size before you can start putting another house on it. Those would really help to address my concerns.
So the lots you're talking about around the lake are generally not more than an acre.
Many of them are less than an acre. Many of them are half or a third of an acre. Some are larger.
And what about in the town of Menominee?
The town of Menominee, I'm just trying to think. There are a few that are subsize in R1. Like Irvington area, there are just a few little clusters here and there. Other than that, the R1 is usually real close to the city, like Woodland Terrace. So yeah, R1 is really the only thing I have, and what we've got here is you've got R2, R3, general ag, basically almost unlimited, and I'm only asking for some, what I think are reasonable restrictions in R1, or give it a separate zoning. Just somebody says, oh, those are just suggestions that they seem minor. Like Diane said, it shouldn't be this big a deal.
Diane, you're concerned about the 1 acre. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Chairman.
know you were
That's sort of
thinking
rude,
about
huh?
your thoughts, not
I
my
wasn't
thoughts.
listening. Yes, I was. Again, I think I think it imposes undue restrictions that are not necessary on what is going to be a subordinate sized dwelling with fairly rigorous design and implementation standards. So I think it is unnecessary. Your concerns about the lake are probably well-founded, but again, I think the design standards proposed are going to make it pretty close to impossible for those people who are living on little triangle-shaped half-acre, quarter-acre lots at the lake to build an ADU. It's not going to be possible.
We just disagree.
Fundamentally, we do disagree.
So without objection from the committee, I know as Monica pointed out, people have come here to listen and share. So is it okay if we invite a few people to come up and, anyone who's been listening to us who has thoughts about this, who would like to, yeah. Why don't you, I'll start with you. If you want to come up to the microphone, again, name and address, and then just a couple minutes at the most.
Yeah, I'll just be quick because I want to give other people time also, but Anastasia Sigorsky, I live at 630 Broadway Street, just over in downtown, pretty much. But I guess for me, I don't know, it sounds like there's somewhat of a redundancy that I'm hearing, just in as far as if there is already a countywide, townwide 1 acre minimum requirement, building requirement in general, it doesn't feel like there needs to be a additional point made about the R1 ADUs, because if there is already a 1 acre minimum for building in general, then I feel like we're kind of addressing your concern with people building on under 1 acre lots. So for me, I don't know, I guess I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It feels, from my point of view, a little bit of a redundancy in the conversation, because it feels like I just said the 1 acre requirement kind of is already satiating the concerns about building on less than 1 acre properties. So yeah, I guess I sort of just wanted to see if maintaining the 1 acre limit would sort of alleviate the issues of people building on less than 1 acre lots, because I guess the information that I'm missing is how many lots slash how many properties in Dunn County are actually zoned R1 that are more than that are less than or more than an acre, you know? So yeah, that's all I had to say. Was it feels like we're kind of like talking in circles about something that might already be addressed if there is just a countywide building 1 acre, that what that keeps being referred to as the 1 acre requirement.
You want me to respond? Well, yeah, it's really interesting to hear you comment on that. There are hundreds of lots that are less than an acre right now because they're grandfathered in or whatever. So if you have a half an acre right now, you're okay because it was made before the 1 acre requirement.
Interesting.
So there are hundreds of them, and
That would be able to build because they're grandfathered in after
correct.
the 1 acre requirement was set.
Right, so they could have a half acre, and if there was room, as Diane pointed out, for septic and so forth, then they could build the ADU, the detached ADU.
So is there a way to include a 1 acre minimum in the general ordinance that is being proposed? Assuming that 1 acre is reasonable and that we're trying to address concerns of, I guess, overloading the R1 district with buildings or with houses. I mean, I guess, yeah, for me, the other thing before I just wanted to point out before I sit down is like, right, this ordinance is being thought of in the context of hardship. And so I guess I also wanted to sort of question, as a listener, where that number of you threw out earlier, right, the approximation of about how many people are we considering living in an ADU, and the approximation was thrown out of 1 to 2 people. I guess I would like more context about where that number is coming from, because I suppose for me, the people that I have been talking to that are citizens of Dunn County and are concerned slash interested, personally interested in this ADU amendment, for them, they are small families. They are small families that do not want to live in an 800 square foot home. You know what I mean? When I was hearing the 800 square feet going down to 1,000 square feet, for me, what that sounds like is we're alienating families, which in my experience and in the conversations I'm having about this ordinance are the main population of people that this is also going to, no worries, also bless you, that this ordinance is going to address our families. So that's one thing that I definitely want to echo into this conversation is I don't know that the 1 to 2 people approximation of what the 1 to 2 people approximation is necessarily accurate, at least in as far as, for me, I think it alienates the view of young families in Menominee and Dunn County that would be, for
Okay.
example, maybe moving on to.
I think you made your point
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
So anyways,
I think, though, I would say that it is not, we're looking at it more of as an opportunity rather than a problem. So you bring up a lot of good points about how to make it a better opportunity. But one thing I would note is that if one of the roles of ADUs traditionally has been to allow starter homes for people or to allow the existing homeowner to move into a smaller unit so that their existing unit is available for another family to live in. And that's one of the problems we have right now is people aren't moving out of those houses. So anyway, thank you for your comments, sir.
Mhm.
Appreciate it. Other comments? I'll go with you. Okay, a couple minutes, maybe a little bit shorter this time.
So I'm Eli Brewer, also at 630 Broadway. I think she covered most of what I want to say also. I guess I wanted to ask some specific questions about if there was like more reasons, like you said, like, oh, there's historical reasons for having the 1 acre rule. Like if you could maybe elaborate and like give specifics on like what that is. And then like, I was wondering like if there's reasons why you want to go under the 1,500 square feet. Like you say like there's local reasons, like but there is like a larger context going on like in this country and our communities. So like why not do something that will be more useful for everyone when it is a possibility, instead of just like doing something that will maybe help 1 or 2 people. I think we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Might want to comment, 1 or 2 people isn't not helping them. But whenever they were asked for maybe 4, we might have had a whole bunch of requests.
I'm gonna ask you to share that comment.
Lisa
Go-
Pellner, E3114 US Highway 12, Menominee. Couple comments and some notes I made. As far as matching the units or having them look the same. Like I say, I have some friends who had this happen to them, and just to put some light on it, like Cenex, for example, if I want to paint my propane tank, which a lot of people want to do, they have some very simple wording to make it match. It can be 2 shades lighter or 2 shades darker because they know matching exact is restrictive. And the same thing that happened with my friends when they put on their big man cave that's giant. It was the same kind of wording. Because you can't pick in colors. That's a personal preference, but it was very loosely written so that it's somewhat blended, because matching exact materials and that kind of thing. So that's just a thought that I had. I'm also going to bring up to the Plan Commission at our next meeting about maybe talking about ordinances, hearing. That's why because one of the reasons I'm coming to these meetings, so we can hear what's coming down the pike and see what they have to say about it. Maybe I can give some feedback on that. One question is this attached ADU? It's extension, it's just an extension on your home. What makes it an attached ADU versus a duplex? What is the definition in that? I would be very interested to hear that, because a duplex needs to be an R2. Is an attached ADU something that has some doors that go together that make it? I've done with my landscaping, I've seen that happen where they have the mother-in-law suite that's separated by an interior door. So seeing some or hearing what the definition is between the two would be interesting and I think pertinent. I've been listening to Mr. Kinnear's comments about the septic and the groundwater and the size of the lots. And I think all that ties together to our groundwater specifically. I'm passionate about it. I was involved in the sand mining things, primarily because our groundwater, our lakes and our rivers are suffering from some things, our septic's leaking, overcrowding, runoff water. I know that's addressed in the county, but I'm hearing that I'm thinking that that's why the 1 acre minimum for the accessory dwelling unit plus the primary unit. Is that what we're saying? Is the primary unit plus the accessory dwelling unit can be on 1 acre? And I think I'm hearing that's because of groundwater concerns, and I agree with that 100%. So if that's the underlying issue. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Supervisor Kinnear started sharing with me a comment, and could you share it to everyone, Mike?
Yeah, I know a couple of you have mentioned the 1 or 2 people. I think maybe I was misunderstood because I didn't say it clearly, but when people would come to the zoning office for an ADU, it was usually an ADU for 1 or 2 people. But there were a whole bunch of people that came for ADUs over the years. Is that correct?
So I think that 1 to 2 came from pretty much the majority of the people we've had ask us have said it's going to be for a single person or a couple. So we haven't had a whole lot of people call us and say, well, it's going to be more than that. It's not, we're not assuming that there isn't that in any case, but that's just a thing that was thrown out as an observation from our staff. We have had one public comment that did say they wanted a family in their ADU. I think that was at the last meeting.
Yeah. Mr. Thomas. Name and address.
Richard Thomas, N 2010 420th Street, Town of Dunn. I'm on the Land Use Planning Commission in the Town of Dunn, and we're a little late getting onto this. I just wanted to throw out a few things. They're a little disconnected. The first is that I tend to agree with Diane on a lot of stuff in that it is not our huge responsibility to put binders on people and tell them what they can and cannot do. We do want to guide stuff. We do want to steer it in the right direction. That's one thing. Another is there's discussion today on Lake Tainer and lots there. My biggest concern about that is, and you'd be subordinate units, so they'd be small. Most of the houses there are small, so if you got an ADU there, they'd be awfully small. But my biggest concern there would be the septic systems, because a lot of them are not to code at this point. And by adding more volume to it, it would be reasonably treacherous. I agree with people's comments about no mobile homes as an ADU. 1,500, so I want to talk for a second about.
I was confusing. Could you clarify that?
I said no mobile homes as ADUs,
Okay.
or no ADUs on mobile homes, both. What is, part of it is what is the intent of this? Part of it is housing and increasing the housing. But I see a lot of the intent of ADUs is to be able to bring senior citizens into the care of a home of their child. And so generally you're only going to see one or two there in a city or in an R1. And so I don't see large homes being built on R1 very often. I see 1,500 square feet out in the country on Ag 1 or on an agricultural land where maybe a whole family, a husband, a wife, and 2 kids or 3 kids are moving in to take care of mom and dad who are in the home front. And that's the way they want it to be. So that was one thing. A couple questions, 13.3.17.07. What is adequate off-street parking is a question. That's under A. Size and scale limits. The size and scale of ADU must remain proportionate to the primary dwelling and not negatively impact the surrounding residential character. Who decides that? That's kind of a sticky slope we're talking here. Again, we're not here to clamp down on people. We're here to make it possible for them to do stuff properly. That's about it, I guess. Interesting discussion today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. I'm gonna take, if, okay, I don't want this to go on forever. I'm sorry. So you're gonna have to be, okay, you and then one, I'll do 2 more. Okay. Okay, what, Bob, you have something you want to say too?
Yeah, what I see from town.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hey, Diego Marin, 630 Broadway. Let's see. Yeah, I personally think we should eliminate the minimum requirement of 1 acre. I think we should focus more on making the houses scalable, right? If it's less than 1 acre, let's make sure there's like adequate space and find a way to gauge that out by scale. But I think any sort of limitation in that way, I mean, even a 500-foot house in a little tiny half-acre plot could help somebody. This is a matter of, as sure as people are going to be born tomorrow, we're going to need more housing. And this is a crisis. This isn't like, we're not functioning under normal conditions. We really are not. We need to start considering these 10, 20, 30 years plans, because right now 2 hospitals are closing down. We don't have enough beds for old people that need hospice. And so right now it'll be that transition where the old folks are moving into places to settle down and be taken care of. But there's still going to be more kids now than there are old people today. And they're going to need active houses that are big enough to support multiple people, multiple young people who don't have an opportunity for equity in our housing market at the moment. And so I think that having these houses with less restrictions will, in the long run, mitigate the struggle that people will have to feel in participating with the economy, and simultaneously give everybody an opportunity to, age and become intergenerational and live and die participating fully with their families, helping each other raise their kids.
Thank you.
Marie Kildee, N5510 50th Street, Wilson. I live on a farm with my father and co-own that farm with my sister. And we're hoping to live there together, and my sister wants to raise a family. So flexibility in housing matters a lot to us when it comes to keeping our family together, which is why, especially in general ag right now, with the difficulty that farmers have keeping young folks on the farm and making all of that work financially, especially in agriculturally zoned areas, I would be strongly in favor of a lot of flexibility when it comes to ADUs and ADUs that can accommodate small families as well. When it comes to more like R1 zoning, I did do some research on this, and everything I came across seemed to speak favorably for ADUs generally. HUD's in favor of them. They seem to have a generally positive impact on communities. I would disagree with the 1 acre restriction, and with the design limitations as well, just because looking at the way some of these ADUs are designed, one of the real strengths of ADUs is that they're very flexible. They can be tailored to the property. So while I would absolutely recommend having strong requirements that ADUs need to meet when it comes to, making sure they're not going to negatively impact the groundwater, making sure they're not going to negatively impact their neighbors. I think it's important to leave a lot of flexibility there so that people can invigorate their communities with creative housing that's responsive to their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that Mr. Cook is here, another town board person. Do you have anything you want to add, Bob? Or?
I would if you don't mind.
Yeah, please. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to come and offer your comments.
I'm Bob Cook, Town of Red Cedar Chairman. I live at E6477 490th Avenue. I think we have to go back and look at what were ADUs designed for. I grew up with ADUs in my community, and that was typically on farmland, and it was an accessory dwelling for the parents or the children when they started out before the parents moved off the farm. There were even some cases 3 generations living there with 3 places on a R1 property. The discussion of ADUs attached and non-detached is quite important. ADUs that are attached could be allowed in 1 acre or less properties. Unattached, I do not see working, especially in the Lakewater districts, because those people are there originally because of the lake, recreation, a chance to get away. And Mike had talked about how you're going to regulate that in smaller, non-conforming substandard lots. Uh, I don't think you should allow a standalone ADU in anything that's substandard. And the standard is a 1 acre per house designated by the state. And we went round and round with this in this committee when we built the Timber Valley subdivision. That we're planning on putting 53 housing units on an 80 acre property. And the complaint was, what are you going to do about groundwater contamination? Person on the hill, well and septic, water runs downhill in the ground. It's going to affect the guy that you figured down below. And the state says it's allowed. The county went along with it, allowed it. But I don't think we should even allow unattached units on less than 1 acre. And it's not really to alleviate the housing crisis. It's to allow the elderly to age at home on a property they already own, whether that be children that come back from far away or a few miles away, want to live close to home, help take care of mom and dad, or a trusted caretaker that they would feel comfortable with living in an ADU on their property. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Mike?
I'm sorry.
So how full is, Timber Valley? Cause it hasn't been that long ago that it was all like divided out.
I'm just guessing here, but I'm going to say probably 80% or 85% sold.
It is already, huh? Okay.
Yeah. And my problem now is people trying to build this time of the year when their mind says we should be building because it's nice weather,
Mm-hmm.
but Mother Nature says we cannot build because of road conditions.
Thank you. But one more
Yeah, you bet.
comment. It seemed like, but maybe I'm not paying attention, but when we first started talking about ADUs, it was about bringing back, some older parents or bringing back a child that needed more like supervision, but yet they want to live on their own. But now I'm starting to hear today that, well, this should be a good place for, young families to start out, like a starter home. So it seems like it's kind of morphed from family members. Now all of a sudden it's going to be like a starter home for young families. And then as far as zoning, we've also got to respect the people that live in an area that's already zoned. They have a certain perception of what that zone was supposed to be like. And now all of a sudden, if we're going to change that radically, I think we have to look at their rights also. So, thank you.
Got an answer to that, Gary? Yeah, no, I think you raised good points, and I think, thanks a lot, Bob. So yeah, the discussion has broadened a lot, and for a lot of good reasons. And I think the study is one, but also just the reality of what. So we have a bigger plate than we started with, no question about it. I know everyone wants to stay here all day and talk about this, but I'm struggling a little bit as to how to move forward on this. If anybody have any suggestions? I mean, I think I still think the 1,000 square foot limit in R1. Personally, I think it makes sense. I think you can build a adequate sized dwelling for a small family. They're not going to want to live there for their whole lives, probably, but for their first part of their lives, and not impinge on what Gary just pointed out, which is the fabric of the neighborhood that people are already been living in. But what other issues do we want to? I mean, I don't know if people agree with that or not, but I think I've heard kind of willingness to consider that as an option. Are there other options we could ask Ann to consider? Because we're putting an awful lot on her table here that would resolve some of the concerns people have. Yeah, Mike.
Well, I don't know. I asked Diane, when I threw out the saying that just make another zone for R1, R18, is that something that would, no?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I'm amenable to considering some size restrictions. I'm not amenable to 1 acre lot minimums and attaching additional restrictions, but I would be willing to consider a size restriction.
After listening to this, Ann, do you have any recommendations or thoughts?
I guess I just kind of wanted to go through like what I think I'm hearing and what maybe you'd like to see. So I'm hearing maybe look at some options for size restrictions. I think at some point someone mentioned the parking. We actually ended up taking that out, I believe, and just making sure that that's something you wanted to do. I'm also hearing maybe take out the design standards. That's not something we're going to do. What I wasn't sure about was the location, if we wanted to specify that it couldn't be in the front yard or if it needed to be back or if we just leave that open. I think that's all I can remember. If anybody else can add to that, that would help me.
Other things?
I wanted to say on the subject of front versus backyard, whatever, I'd be okay with not having a restriction about front versus backyard. I think that it really depends on the property, whether it makes sense. That's my take.
I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, we could continue to discuss this issue as we have for months. We've been discussing this. Anne, when did we start?
August.
August. We've had public comment from people who would like to move forward with this. So we can continue to toss this around and Supervisor Kinnear and I are not going to agree on this. I think where we are is to bring the text amendment, which we started to look at last month or maybe the month before. And maybe we're ready to vote it up and down, up or down. I mean,
No, I think we're getting close.
We are not all of us going to agree on this, and I'm pretty sure of that.
I think
we need
the
to
first
move
time
on
we
it.
saw the text amendment was last month,
Last
2
month?
weeks ago. So it's not like we've been dragging our feet on the text amendment forever. But I think I would say that the items that you mentioned, I'm not, I would ask this question. Are people, I hadn't thought about the up front and back. Monica brought it up. Is that something that people have agree with Monica about, or are there concerns about that? Is it something we want Ann to consider or not? Ann suggested she would maybe take that out, not have it be an element. I'm fine with that. Okay. So I think what we do is ask Ann to take back those suggestions and come back to us with a more formal proposal to consider. And I don't think we're ready for a public hearing yet. Are we? Do you think, Diane? What does the committee think?
Well, in December 20th meeting, we talked about we're going to have a public listening session as an open invite, electronic submittals and so forth. And we had a little discussion on that, and I thought we all wanted to do that.
The feedback I got from that, just for clarity, was to make sure that the towns were aware of the change, which I went to the Wisconsin Towns Association and sent out that invitation verbally. I also did a presentation on EDUs and, invited them to come to this meeting today. I know we got Bob and we got some planning commission members here. I personally would love to hear more from the towns, but maybe they're open to coming to a public hearing. Those voices can still be heard at a public hearing. I just need direction on whether you just want another draft or if you want something you can vote on, and then I can take it from there.
So, Mr. Chairman, Ann said that we started the sewer back in August, but it seemed like, for me anyhow, just the last couple meetings, I've got a lot more information.
Yes.
You know, the first ones were just kind of glossed over, but here we're getting down to the substance. So it seems like every meeting I'm getting a little more of what they really wanted to do on it. And I don't know about like a lot of townships, but in town of Colfax, we have very, very few like R1s. It's mostly all GA or, you know, that's about it. So it's not a big problem for us as far as R1s. Out here, so.
I think it would make sense for you to put together a draft and bring it back for one more discussion before we schedule a public hearing. That's what I think.
Could we, and this is just a suggestion, so if we're going to do a public hearing, we need to do the 2 newspaper notices prior to the hearing. So just with the way PR&D is scheduled, maybe we want to set a date for that potential public hearing so I can go into that process and kind of get ready for that.
That's fine.
So I think,
Any objection to that?
I'm just bringing up a calendar here. So our next meeting is the 21st. So I can bring another draft for the 21st of February. We should, if you wanted to have it your first meeting in March,
That's fine.
that would have, this would allow enough time for that hearing to get set up. If you'd like to set that.
Okay.
There is somebody raising their hand too.
I just was, and is it possible that, or you don't even know if it's allowed to send that draft out to the local town PRDs and board members or to the news so that maybe if they do have some more input, it won't be at the public hearing?
Yep, the intent of this is to send that draft when it's been in a pretty finalized state. I did not send this one out because I felt like there was a lot of discussion that still needed to happen here. And I also didn't want to like ruffle too many feathers with people thinking this is the final choice. But yes, I would be happy to send that out for sure. Both planning commissions and town boards.
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to call it. We've been at this long enough.
Somebody had suggested at the end of the last meeting that there be a tiered level for the square footage based on, like general ag would be up to so much square foot. That R1 would be so much square foot, that it would be a tiered.
That's kind of what we're talking
I
about.
think so. It
but-
sort of isn't fleshed out, but it's
Yeah, okay.
moving that direction.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. I think we're gonna, with that, we're gonna end discussion on this item. I apologize for being so long, but I don't apologize for the fact that we need to have this discussion. So, and I appreciate the public input. But with that, then we'll schedule the public hearing and we'll look at another draft at our next meeting. And then we'll move on to 6B, the groundwater monitoring program report.
Ready? All right. So Chase Cummings here, Dunn County Land and Water Conservation and Heather Wood, to give a report on the 2023 groundwater monitoring program. We've touched base with you all throughout this process, little bits of pieces of information here and there as to what some of the results are saying. In your packet, you should have a fairly thorough report on what took place. Remind you of what the goals were of the program is in that report. Heather will probably cover those a little bit. But I really want to say, like, you know, once we came up with a plan for this, all of you deliberated on it and approved a plan. It was really thrown into Heather's shop and she ran with it. And we've got a pretty successful program, I think, out of it. So I'm going to let her get into some of the details. Remind you that we'll try to keep this, you know, fairly brief, yet open for discussion and comment. And then this will be presented in its entirety as well at the February County Board meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather and she can let you know what she did.
All right. So kind of like Chase said, this is not the full report in PowerPoint format that nobody has the capacity for that.
But this is kind of touching on some of the high points and some of the things that we did and some of the things that you've already seen, in all honesty. So we'll get right into it. This is just the program overview. We had we had over 1,000 people sign up, and then some people dropped out. Some people forgot that they signed up. Some people moved. Had some people drop out. We were questioning our sanity for the month of June last year, but we got all those samples collected. We had our awesome intern who was out collecting only God knows how many, because he sure as I'll get out lost count of where he was at. But went through UW Stevens Point and did their comprehensive homeowners package. So we got all of this data, and I've been staring at maps for an unholy amount of time, but this is where we're at for signups. Unsurprisingly, Tainter, Menominee, and Red Cedar were the most signups because they're the most populous. A little bit more surprisingly, some of the less populous towns, Peru, for instance, which is the least populous town in the county, had a fairly decent amount of signups. So this is just the quick reminder. We had two main overarching goals with this whole program, and that was to get a single point in time, somewhat quality controlled data set. And that's why we had staff doing the collections. When we were out doing this, it was one of those things where I would say, do you have any sort of filtration? No, I just have an iron filter. And so having the staff go out and do those collections really helped kind of quality control that data. So we were actually getting groundwater data and not treated, water from the faucet. And then education and outreach. A lot of the issues that we found were things that people just don't know about. A lot of folks that I talked to, well, my water tastes great, it smells great, it doesn't smell bad. Well, you can't really smell if your nitrates are high. And so it really helped us get out into the community and make connections with all of those people as we were doing the collections. So this one is one of those things that really speaks to that education point. Arsenic is one of the parameters that we tested for. It was in the metals, and it's something that really is primarily caused by geology. It's not something that is going to be really heavily affected typically by land use or soils or anything like that, population density, what have you, but you're not going to know about it unless you test your water. And so this is the limit of detection for this is 5 parts per billion, or 0.005 milligrams per liter. And then the limit of quantitation. So the limit of detection is, as the name would suggest, how much it has to be at before the lab can actually even detect it. And then the limit of quantitation is the limit that they have that sets basically when they're confident in that. So if you're in between that limit of detection and your limit of quantitation, we call that a fuzzy result. And so you should get it retested because we're not 100% about that concentration. The limit of quantitation for the lab that we went through is the safe drinking water standard. And so anybody who had a detect needed to get it retested. So we actually had more people with detectable levels of arsenic in their water than we did for exceedances of nitrates. Now, of course, everyone who did have that either detectable or an exceedance was given resources and information about retesting, labs to go through, and the DNR's program, which helps with financial assistance for folks who have unsafe drinking water. From our DNR contact at the private water supply end of things, he said that there was a couple of folks that he's lost track of how many people have contacted him from this program. But there have actually been several people in Dunn County given money from the state to help get safe drinking water into their house. And some of it's been from arsenic, manganese, nitrates, all that stuff. But so up here, the red it was one of those things where when I was looking at the point data, it really shows a pattern, but I can't be showing point data for anonymity's sake. And so, prevailing science would suggest that we would actually have a lot of hits in that northeastern corner, and we didn't have any. And so this is one of those things where once you start getting down to the local level, you start seeing a lot more nuance than you would get when you're zoomed out. And one big disclaimer with this map, this is not a forecast. This is one model. This is not going to say, if you're going to go drill a well in the town of, Sheridan, that you're going to not get any arsenic. It's not saying if you're in Tiffany, you're guaranteed to get hit with arsenic. It's just saying you need to be aware, you need to be testing. And that's just a general pattern that we noticed as we're going through and processing this data. So then this one is a little bit more familiar. This is the countywide arsenic or nitrates data. On average, it was about 4.42, but that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. 114 people were found to be above that 10 milligrams per liter drinking water standard. We had one person that topped out at 40, which is quite high. What they do with it is beyond me. We give them the resources. You can lead a drink to horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. So we gave them those resources, and hopefully they tapped into some of them. But this is another way to look at nitrates, because natural systems don't listen to political boundaries. And so we can take, averages and look at what it looks like in the town of Springbrook versus the town of New Haven, but that's not really going to tell us a whole lot. This is one of the ways that I prefer to look at natural systems, and that is kind of how they are. We've dubbed it a heat map. So you take all of the point data and you run it through some models, and then you sit there with 5 different models and you compare them for about 5 hours, and you figure out which one makes the most sense. So this is the disclaimers that come with all of my heat maps. This is a 2D model of a 3D system. So average groundwater depth in Dunn County ranges from 50 feet to 400 feet. This is a 2D representation of that variation. The wells that we sampled, they come in all different shapes, sizes, drilled, dug, construction types, all that. And so it's important to remember that this is not a forecast. This is just one model, and this is just one point in time for our data. So we can make general patterns, we can comment on the general patterns, but we can't say, if you drill a well here, it's going to have high nitrates unless you do X, Y, Z. Once you get down to that fine level, it becomes a lot more nuanced. It becomes a lot more site specific. So for us, it wasn't terribly surprising that in the southeastern corner of the county, you have a lot of really high nitrates because of those soils. We have really light soils, really intensive ag land use, and it's just, we kind of expected it. But a little less expected, and maybe this goes to the data and education and everything that this program was meant to encompass, is that giant hotspot up kind of by Cedar Falls. And we weren't really expecting that, and we don't really have a great explanation for it. And so this is one of those things where as we go along, as we get more data, we can start to try and parse things out. But groundwater is kind of one of those things that there's never going to be a silver bullet. There's never going to be a, aha, this is what is causing it, let's fix it sort of thing. So that's all I have to say there. Next steps. So, yep. The dinosaur is one of my favorite things when Google generates a QR code for you. So that wasn't my doing, but I'm not complaining. So right now, all of the participants have received their samples, their results. If they haven't, if anybody comes to you guys and asks you, just have them contact me directly and I can work with them. I'm working with the Eau Claire City County Public Health Department right now for this year's program. We're keeping it a little more local for a variety of reasons, partially because I can just pick up the sample bottles myself. I live in Lake Hallie, so that'll save us on shipping. The pricing works out about the same. We're not doing the same exact testing that we did last year. We're still doing for metals because some of the ones like arsenic were a little unexpected. So we're going to do some metals. We're going to keep doing nitrates. All of the town halls and or the proxies will be retested. And then we've got about 240 samples worth of money to go with. I've started taking samples, or not samples, sample signups, I should say. And I can't remember the exact number I'm at right now, but we just got this up and running. So hopefully I will start getting more signups here in the nearest future. I'm planning on starting to get out sampling after the 4th of July, and it'll go fairly similar to last year. And I'm projecting it'll take most of the month of July, and then there'll be another report to go along with it. The data from this program is in the county county groundwater mapping application. Worked with Rachel in land information, and she got that uploaded. Yeah, and so signups are now available. That's what the QR code is for. It will take folks to the groundwater sign up form, and then that'll send the information straight to me. And then beyond this year, it really depends on funding. I've got a award report out to a program that public health sent up my way that could maybe get some funding, but it really depends on what the EPA decides there. So if we get that award, then we'll have some funding for 2025. If we don't, then we continue the search for money.
I'll just add to so hopefully you've had a chance to look at the written report. There's a lot more information in there than what Heather covered here. And then the next agenda item that is with us for our budget carry forward requests, Heather mentioned doing some monitoring here in 24. We have about $28,000 remaining from last year's funding. So that's what we're going to be working with right now. Last year, we spent well over 1,000 hours in staff time collecting this, but Heather mentioned some of the benefits of that. And I think I've mentioned those in previous meetings too. And I think it's quite valuable that we undertook this program with that lens on. And I think we met the goals of the program. Certainly, I think there is perspectives of what can we use this data for? How can we use it in decision-making locally? And, we've talked about some of the cautions, and Heather mentioned some cautions here as well of this being point-in-time data and the number of variables that are on any given well, from well construction to time of year to the geology and soils and land use around it. So this information is valuable, though. I mean, it gives us an idea of either confirmation of where we may have expected some concerns, but also some areas that we need to look at closer. And as we look for program implementation, whether that's through our Chapter 10 Ag Performance Standard Ordinance, nutrient management planning, maybe it comes into play when we look at land divisions or other aspects of our work within our broader department. Certainly this work is valuable, but to draw stark conclusions and justification for why these results are the way they are, we have to proceed with that with caution. So I think with that, we entertain any discussion or conversation. And if you have suggestions about what you might like to hear for the full county board, we have a little bit of time to try to accommodate that too. So thank you.
Any comments from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to compliment you both and the whole staff. This is a really well done report. It was really comprehensive, and deeply appreciate all the work that you did and the thought that you put into this.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I thought you said you had like 200 and some enough money to take those samples. Are you going to try to go in areas that was maybe not a lot of them taken from a certain area, or are you just taking first come, first serve?
Right now, I'm looking to take first come, first serve. And one of the surprising but pleasant parts of last year's program is that we didn't have many areas where there just weren't samples taken. I mean, of course, down, in some areas where there's just not wells drilled, sure. But we didn't really have any places that really stuck out to me as data gaps. Because that was one of our concerns when we were building this program last year, was that there was going to be these big areas where people are just not wanting us to sample. And that really didn't happen. There was some areas in the western edge, the western half of Weston and O'Galley that didn't really get much for samples, but we still had one or two, yeah. But there's not a whole lot of population down there. And if we can get more folks to sign up, that'd be great. But there really weren't a lot of huge data gaps, which was a pleasant surprise, admittedly.
I would just add too that of the funds we have available for this year, certainly a first come, first serve. But if for some reason there's, lower response rate and participation rate, we can look at ways to use those funds to their fullest. So whether that is looking at areas that we want to follow up on, or even looking at the types of analysis we're going to do on some of these, if there's funds available, we can try to do, source testing and things like that as an option to provide for more information to certain landowners. But as of right now, it's kind of the cleanup of last year of those that may have missed it. So.
I still have people calling me from the postcard last year.
Have you had requests from groups or to do presentations or discussions?
This is the kickoff of my 7-week skid of presentations every week.
Okay. Good to know.
So this will be at the Red Cedar Watershed
Mhm.
Conference. So there's a breakout session there. So encourage those that can promote that. There'll be a breakout session for Heather to cover our work, as well as Barron County will be there, and Chippewa County to talk about theirs. So
Anything else? Again, I think we all agree with Diane. Good work. We're proud of you. Real quickly, item 7A, review of potential county partnership on proposed affordable housing project. This is something that Supervisor Morehouse and I put on the agenda, I guess, because we have our housing, what do you call the group? Task force, a housing task force that is a meeting. Anyway, one of the potential housing development ideas that came up was a partnership with WestCap, actually, to on a grant that they are planning on submitting to receive state funding passed down from the federal funding to develop completely pay for the development of I think it's a 10-unit affordable housing project. And WestCap intends to submit that application, and the design for the housing would be highly energy efficient and state of the art with regard to that, and very affordable. The one thing that they're asking for that will bolster the application is access to free land. And so initially we thought perhaps the county could find land and partner with them, but it turns out that the city seems to be saying that they have identified property in a development that they're already considering, and have just begun discussions with WestCap to potentially partner on that. So we really don't need to talk about this today. It's just kind of a heads up that this is an opportunity that might come along at some point in time. I know the administration is doing a review of a sort of an inventory of county-owned properties that we'll have on hand. So that's all that's there. Are there any questions about that? It's just self-explanatory. Then we'll go to the last item, the 9A that Chase, I think, already explained. So I'm just going to ask for, unless you have additional
well,
comments.
there's a lot more money on there that we're asking to carry forward than
Oh,
just the
okay. Go ahead.
28,000.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So on the screen is the resolution, which you need to decide on today to move to exec committee and county board. Granted, the way that these are laid out, they're difficult to read. So I'm just going to get down to the justification side of things and just highlight a few things. So in our carry forward requests, probably the largest I've ever had to request is over $1 million. And a lot of that has to do with, well, pretty much all but one has to do with grant funding and money that is just contingent on reimbursements and the projects being completed. I guess the one that is probably the most is about 3/4 of the way down there is $796,150. If you recall, that was for a notice of discharge grant for a farm that's near the Barron Dunn County line, the Greg Thompson farm. And that's for assistance in addressing some runoff issues within the Red Cedar watershed. That I'm happy to say that project is pretty much wrapping up from the first phase. So as the timing with the weather and the timing of all of this, within the next couple months, we'll be able to make these payments. Then this, with the carry forward request approved, we can move along. One thing to note there, a little bit different with this program, is that DNR will actually pay us the money before we have to pay it. It's not necessarily typical grant programs. We would make the payment, have to then wait for a reimbursement. And that is not the case for this, since it's such a large amount, it doesn't put as much burden on the county. A little bit further down, actually below that, 79,307. That's for the Red Cedar Conservation Farmers, Farmer-Led Watershed Group. And that's related to the Nitrogen Optimization Pilot Program grant, one of two in the region that it's in year 2, basically, of a 2-year project. So that's a request there. Below that, you'll see the 28,000 remaining for ARPA funds for the groundwater program. And then below that, the 62,000, that's related to our vehicles that we have, our fleet vehicles for our entire department. And actually both of those funding sources below there, the 20,000 as well, is to request carry forward as we are leasing those vehicles from Enterprise. You'll see that in a CIP request coming up. To our request is to buy those out so we can retain them in complete ownership. We didn't have enough funds when we first applied for the CIP, capital improvement plan projects, because cost of vehicles and things went well above, and the timing to get them went above what we were anticipating at the time. So we had to lease those vehicles, and now we're asking to carry that money forward just to pay those out. And then a CIP request is forthcoming to buy those vehicles out so we own them. There's a few other items in carry forward requests above, some of our standard stuff, such as snowmobile trail, bridges, and then our MDV program, the multi-discharger variance program. Below here, the last thing would be our budget adjustments. So we, through the Red Cedar Conservation Farmers Producer-Led Watershed Group, have applied for a Nature Conservancy grant in the amount of $10,000, which has been awarded. So this was not on our radar when we submitted our budget request for 24. So this is part of the adjustment there. It's a quite, I guess, a nice supplemental program to the Producer-Led Watershed program when the state funds are limited. So this can help carry that those programming and practices a little bit further. And then the last thing there, which is not always expected, but our staff and support grant from DACCAP was actually increased for 2024 than what we thought. So we're going to receive just shy of an additional $11,000 to put towards staff. So I guess with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions regarding our request, but you'll certainly see this again in the upcoming meetings of exec and county board. So.
I'm curious about the leased cars versus purchased. I thought the county was leasing all the vehicles because it was more cost effective, but we want to buy them?
So past practice for our department for environmental services is we tend to hang on to our vehicles a lot longer. We don't put as many miles on them as the standard fleet vehicles do for the county. So we've always purchased ours. The lease was a new thing for us and actually kind of a saving grace for not having enough funds as the price of vehicles went up. So at this point in time, it is our intent to try to purchase those and own those, just because we hang on to them for 10, 15 years typically. So we're putting on around 5,000 to 7,000 miles a year on them versus, some other fleet vehicles are much more than that. So that's part of that reasoning.
Other questions? Gary.
Because your office takes care of the money for the snowmobile trails, right? It comes from the state. If the trails aren't open for whatever reason, weather, do you still get those grants, or does the money just not come in?
So in my experience over all the years of being here and in Pepin County, typically the grant is used to its fullest. In the years where there's low snow or maybe no snow and the trails aren't open, there's no grooming hours, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But there tends to be some other work that can be done, trail maintenance, put into some other things like that. So the clubs usually do a pretty good job of trying to justify a year like this where they can still utilize those grant funds. It's all audited. So if there's projects where it just doesn't make sense, or they can't receive the full amount, then it would be, I guess, prorated down based on what the actual expenses are. So usually the clubs do their best to try to make sure that they get as much out of that grant as possible.
Could I have a motion to approve the resolution for carry
Mr. Chairman,
forward and budget
I'll move
adjustment?
approval of the 2023 carry forwards and 24 budget adjustments.
And I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Any announcements? Next meeting is February 21st, and we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
I don't know if you noticed this, but you had 3 or 4 really good puns in a row.
Did I? Yep.